Awesome. So usual, welcome to the GUAC maintenance meeting. Um, this is a OpenSSF meeting, and it's governed by the LF antitrust policy and the OpenSSF code of conduct. Meeting is being recorded and will be published publicly. And let's see, usual suspects on the call. So no new faces yet today. I think we have a couple topics on. The first one we have is, well, we didn't have the meeting last week because of Open Source Summit, and I think most folks on the call were at the conference. So I guess shall we do a quite kind of a quick recap on what's happening, anything interesting that was being talked about there?
Yeah, I saw Brant from Defense Unicorns. He did a presentation on using Zarf with GUAC, and overall, there were a few takeaways. So everything he needed to make it work wasn't in the code. He had a few tweaks. On the GUAC side, it might look like a CLI change to like specify a particular I don't know if it's an address, because all of our addresses are specified, but don't even remember the exact details, but something like that, like specifying an address, or like to use HTTP instead of HTTPS with contacting like something or other, like the whatever is set up in the in the Zarf environment, and that, because it's all air gapped. And so I said, yeah, I'd be happy to add anything that you need there. Um, uh, Also, he built a Quark Zarf package so that you could just, so because Zarf is something you can use to build a package, but you can distribute a package if you'd like. So that's something that we could consider throwing into our make file or whatever it is, so that when we make a release, we can build a Zarf package too. Um, I don't know, I don't see a lot of harm in adding that, but I also don't know how useful it is. If it's kind of just a proof of concept, but so that's something that we could explore. Um, but yeah, it was a pretty cool talk, and it was cool to see like a different use case for GUAC.
That's awesome. I saw like a screenshot. Was that like the Zaf UI with the guac and the SBOM thing, or was that like a custom thing?
I don't think Zarf has a UI, so I'm not sure what screenshot you're talking about, but yeah, he was kind of just showing off running using VS Code. I think it's just running the different commands to spit out to deploy GUAC into the air-gapped cluster, and then running. You could actually run the GUAC visualizer to just see that it's working. Um, the other thing that was interesting, I mean, just from a technical point of view, is he had thought about what all the different ways to get the SBOMs of everything that's being deployed into the GUAC. And I had told him like, hey, you could just run the Go code, or you could run a file uploader or things like that. He ended up sticking to using the OCI registry, and the main reason there was that um, a lot of deployments happen, and Zarf commands or whatever happen before even GUAC is up and running. So, if you want to deploy a few things in order, like every time you deploy, it would make sure all of the SBOMs are in the OCI registry. So that's kind of a central part of Zarf is this offline OCI registry. So that when GUAC just starts up, no matter which step it is in the process, it can slurp down all the SBOMs and continue to do so from the registry.
That's awesome. I think that's probably first production user of the OCI registry.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Other than that, all the usual suspects. Um, yeah. Mihai, did you see anything cool?
Sorry, I was muted. So there are a few talks on uh, merging GUAC and AI. I also hinted that suggestion several times. And there was somebody asking if GUAC can be used like a public instance of GUAC for all of the projects. And I said that now we're doing all of this merge with Trustify, and we're creating like a full ecosystem for supply chain security and observability in the OpenSSF, and should watch the space.
When you say Guac and AI, is there any particular use case? Or like people asking questions of it, or like use it to collect data, or
Yeah, it's more like data set, linking data set and models, and getting all of the AI supply chain
oh,
provenance
okay, okay.
visible via GUAC. Yeah, I see this discussion in some of the talks, and then as I was talking with people, they were like, "When can GUAC do this?"
Some of the kind of the talk we gave at in North America or the last year for KubeCon, right?
Yeah, that one.
So I guess Mihai, maybe a question for you here is like, I know you worked on the notebook salsa generation and stuff like that. Is there like starting to be documents that, or like some metadata that we can collect to identify those things?
Right now, the salsa for ML is not that usable. I mean, you can generate it via GitHub Actions, but nobody does that. So it's just for the demos. And the talk we gave with part last year was also just GitHub Actions. The plan is second half of this year, next year, to start getting more documentation, getting more attestations in place.
It was very manual, right? You created some of those by hand, so there's no like automated way of collecting the data right now. So
Yeah, so basically what happened last year was we were training models and cleaning data sets in GitHub Actions. And because we control the full pipeline, we could know this was specifically the input for this next action.
yeah.
So we would fill in the salsa provenances with all the materials correctly.
So basically the data is missing. The,
Yeah. A
the
lot of
data
data is
collection
missing, and
piece.
also it's like people are not going to use GitHub Actions for this, so we actually need to go where people are using it. So Jupyter notebooks and so on.
How based on your knowledge of the ecosystem, how fractured how does it look like?
So once you get into one of these tools, it will be easy to get into the others. But so far, we haven't talked to anyone, so we don't know yet which is the fastest approach.
Okay.
Do you
So
see
like
that
once
as like a need, I guess? Like are people like I don't know, some people came to you asking about this. Are people actually asking about this? Is like, hey, this isn't actually a problem. Like I'm training, an AI model. I don't understand what data sets is in there. Like I want that provenance. Like, is that a thing?
So it's not critical right now,
Okay.
but like in a few years when we have at the moment, think of ML world as basically level of Sextor. Nothing else on top of Sextor exists. Once you start building more provenances on top, then people will need to start looking into these documents in a more aggregated way. And we can prepare GUAC for that by that time.
is this related to like foundational models, or like models that people that do on top of foundational models?
The fine-tuned models on top of foundational models, yeah.
Gotcha. So these are just like prom engineering stuff, or
No, it's the fine-tuning and fine-tuning again, and so on. And then when you build agents, you also want to see exactly which models you have deployed into each of the agents.
so this is done on top of like for example, I think just from my understanding, right? I think it's like you have like, let's say, the ChatGPT 4.0 model or the Gemini 2.5 Pro model, right? Is the fine
Mhm.
tuning the last step of creating that model, or are we talking about after that model is like using that
Uh,
model and then doing something with it?
it's a little bit mixed. So Google, big companies are training the foundational model, and then they do this reinforcement learning with human feedback and so on to make the model respond correctly to different questions. That could be viewed as a form of fine-tuning. It's actually post-training. Then they might also do fine-tuning to steer the model, like to behave correctly. And then they release this model. And then you as a company take this model and fine-tune it for your specific needs. Like if you are, let's say, United, you want to fine-tune it to know the internal United documentation. Or if you're building it into a code extension, you're fine-tuning it to do code completion and so on. And then that's the model you are releasing.
Right.
Gotcha.
It's on top of the foundational models, like you were saying. So it's after.
Yeah.
That's like a starting point, and then you train other data. You train it with other data after it to fine tune it.
Yeah, and then when you use the model, when you prompt it, you have the possibility to add information to the prompt or to change the prompt to make the model better. That's the prompt engineering part. But that doesn't change the weight of the model. It just changes the context on which the model should start predicting tokens.
Gotcha. So the fine tuning is not part of the context, right? The fine tuning is like additional pass on the model training. Okay. Do you know how are people doing more of that?
Yeah. It's faster. It's much faster than training a full model from scratch. So.
Well, I guess the question is like compared to the people who just like add context into the prompt, is there and like do we know like how much?
In general, in general the planned approach is add context, but if the prompt becomes too long and the model starts missing pieces of the context, then you have to fine tune it. That's the more expensive part.
Okay.
So you shouldn't do fine tuning from the beginning.
I think it depends, right? So I think it depends on where you are and how much money you have. Yes, it's going to be much more time consuming and much more work to fine tune, right? So it really depends your use case. But I don't know. I don't know if Mihai, I don't know if you know like the number of versus people actually using the foundational models versus fine tuning. I think it's probably majority of them are just using the models or using the stuff they find online, like on like Hugging Face and like Olama or whatever else, like other models that people have already fine tuned on their own.
Yeah, so in general, people are just picking the model from the internet and trying with that. And if it doesn't work, then they are fine tuning. On the other end, startups and bigger companies, they are starting directly with fine tuning, even though probably they wouldn't need to do it. So it's both ways. But it's also very easy to fine tune. It's like with transformers or with Olama, you just load the model, give it, this is a database, update your weights for this input output pairs, and you could get it like, depending on your examples, you could get it in like 1 hour, 2 hours, up to a few days.
And there is a annotation, there is a metadata on the data set. Like, because I imagine if it's a private data set, then you it's kind of like Salsa, like a VSA. It's like if I don't know what your internal build system is, I can't reason about.
Yeah, I mean, we will need to also sign the data sets and hash them so that you can refer to them in the Salsa specification as the input.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying like this right now is at 6-store level, and even that's not fully adopted. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay.
But yeah, the plan is to also have the data set signed and yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for the lecture. This was very, very useful. Jeff.
Yeah, for changing topics. Another thing that happened at the conference was their staff was looking to record a interview with people about each project. I didn't want to do it myself, so I was like trying to get Mike and Mihai to do it, but then Mike, whatever time like we ended up with around that they were available, staff was like busy doing something else, and it never ended up happening. So they said they want to do it just on Zoom or whatever. So I don't know if Brandon, if that's maybe something you'd be interested in doing with Mike or Barth or something. It's just I don't know. Mihai did it for a different project. Do you want to say what did they ask?
Yeah, so basically I did it for the model signing project, and they mostly asked, introduce yourself, talk about the project, why is it useful, why should people use it, and where they can find it. And that's also very fast.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I don't know if we should be proactive at reaching out to staff and trying to get that scheduled or if we should just kind of wait around. But it's up to y'all.
Yeah, they were also asking about alternatives and why the project is more usable, more suitable than the alternatives. But for model signing, there is no real alternative, so that was easy. But
Cool. Yeah, if there's a, do you know who you talk to? Like how we can follow up on that? It's an email thread.
Susan, I think was her name. 1 second, let me find it.
Thanks. Stacy might be a good person
Stacy, yes.
to contact with. I don't know if the interviewer is always going to be her or somebody else,
Okay,
but I think she's kind of in charge of it.
I'd be happy to follow up, and then I will CC the mailing list. Oh, like the maintenance mailing list, so we can all look at and see that. Stacy, right? Cool. Anything else from the summit? Mihai?
Yeah, so not the summit itself, but there was that discussion in Slack about the GraphQL example for scorecard being a little bit weird. I think we have the stale examples compared to the query. It's basically the Perl, instead of being split into components, was all put together into just the name field.
Say that again. What was the issue?
So on Slack, on the OpenSSF Slack, on GUAC channel, there was this person asking about the example that we have for scorecard, where for scorecard spec in the source, we have name as just TensorFlow, namespace github.com/TensorFlow. So the namespace is actually containing part of the name all munched together, compared to the Perl specification where we should like split it into components.
Was it not split? Wait. I think it's because it's GitHub. Oh, shit. So it should have been github.com/TensorFlow should be a namespace, right?
Yes, so GitHub should be, so we should have type GitHub, namespace TensorFlow, and name TensorFlow, I think.
No, I think we had namespace github.com/TensorFlow.
Oh, okay. I mean, we still don't have the type.
Oh, we don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, probably doesn't matter. Yeah, I did. So yeah, I told him that either the example was old or I don't remember the full query and so on. So then he moved to asking about getting all the connections, and that's when I tagged the UN part.
Yeah.
I mean, if the example is correct, that's okay. We should probably just tell him that that's okay.
So the question is our example incorrect in,
Yeah.
Is it on the website or is it in the examples directory?
In the example directory.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Yeah. I also saw he responded to my comment, so I will reply to that as well. All right. Next one, Ben. Question on continuing monthly community meetings. I guess I chat about this. How was the last one? What's your thoughts around here?
Yeah, so I was just thinking we don't have to decide this today, but we've had a lot less attendance in the community meetings over the past yearish or so. And with 1.0 being out, that kind of feels like maybe a good marker for like, all right, I'm not sure the community meeting adds a lot of value anymore, especially because the maintainer meetings have been public for what, almost a year now, maybe a little over a year. And so like it does, most people who have something to talk about that maybe would have gone in the community meetings are coming to the maintainer meetings instead. Um, and so, with doing blog posts and, having public community meetings or public maintainer meetings, um, I don't see that we're getting a lot of value from the time people are putting into trying to come up with ideas for the community meeting and then, showing up and having it mostly be maintainers.
Jeff.
Yeah, I think Ben, I agree with you on the reasoning of, that people could just stop by here. What would happen if somebody stopped by to this meeting and like wanted to chat about, you know, random potential partnerships or whatever? And we were like, would we ever say like, hey, come back or go to the community meeting? Like, it seems like that hasn't happened.
Yeah,
That we've had
and I
time in
needed
this meeting because I could see that being a reason, like as if like we are too busy, reviewing PRs in this meeting to like talk about other topics.
Yeah, historically, I feel like we've been pretty open to people just dropping in with their topics. I
Mhm.
think at worst we might say, we've got too much for this one. Can you come back next week? Um,
Right,
I think it's better than saying, hey, we just had a community meeting. Can you come back in a month?
right.
Um, and I actually do need to step away real quick to go answer the door, but I'll be listening.
I definitely agree with like I think we've had Aditya come by, we had Brent come by and chat about stuff. Seems to work pretty well. So I think no objections here. I would say like a good opportunity would be now with I know we talked about like the plan with like having um like changing the scope, broadening the scope of like the community, right? I think that would be a good opportunity to then like restructure all the meetings to make it work better. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but we don't need to do it. Maybe we can do it when we need it, like, not scheduled, but when things accumulate as they probably will, we can then start doing them again. There's no need to like keep them going while we are low on new topics. I think everybody who would come to the community meeting hang out in the Slack, so it would be easy to organize week or two in advance.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Like an ad hoc, like if there's topics and everything, then we have it. Otherwise, we don't. That's fine.
Yeah, I could see. And I'm sorry, I did miss a little part of the conversation, but sort of the way we did for back in December when we had the conversation about um, the air gap stuff that Brant had wanted to discuss. That was just sort of set up. Hey, when the people who need to talk about this are available, we'll have a time. I think that has worked well.
I guess it sounds like we have some fuzzy consensus that we don't need to have these regular community meeting um, for purposes of the existing community meeting, like the weekly meetings are good. And then if we decide that there's a need for community meeting, we can schedule one ad hoc. I guess the question I was kind of thinking about also is alongside the kind of inclusion of the trustification and stuff like that. I forget Trustify, right? That's the name that we settled on. Sorry.
That's the next topic, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's the next topic. Yeah. I was wondering whether maybe we can kind of fold that into the announcement, kind of so that's like a restructuring effort as well, and then invite the repurpose meetings. But maybe let's talk about that and then decide whether we should. Yeah. I guess before we move on, any other comments to add on to the community meeting discussion? Okay. All right, Dayan. Go ahead.
So let me try to recap where we are at the moment with all the process and what things are still puzzling me and like find the best way how to progress, right? So we started talking about moving justification slash Trustify, not only to OpenSSF but to GUAC particularly, right? So I was naively thinking that if we just move only things that are useful for all of us in the future, it will be easier from the IP perspective. But it turns out that's not the case. So, but I'm trying to find a way how we do it, not to overwhelm the GUAC with tons of stuff, and being able to do what we need to do. So thing is that what I'm hearing from our IP people that we need to donate all IP justification justified to the OpenSSF. Because if we just move the repos, we can't use those names in our repos without transferring the IP. But if we don't, but then the problem is that all the things that we, for example, leave behind in the first step, not to overwhelm everything, then we need to ask a specific permission from the OpenSSF to use Trustify in those projects, which can be problematic, right? And the thing I was thinking in the first place about this is that I think there's like some 60 repositories in Trustification.org, which I don't want to move to GUAC.org, right? And it doesn't make sense. But even in the things that peer use is probably 15 or 20 some of the repositories, which I think will be overwhelming, right? And we need those things because those are some testing tools and dumb things that people are using in the day-to-day work to work on things, right? So I'm just wondering how to proceed with these things. One thing that now I'm have in mind. So you guys are much more have much more information about how the foundation actually works and what's possible and what's not possible. Would it be possible to do a first step to donate everything to OpenSSF, right? And keep everything in the Trustification repo and everything, and then working like when everything is governed by the OpenSSF, then okay, now move things to GUAC, right? Does that make any sense, or do you have any other thoughts and ideas based on what I just tried to summarize, right?
I think I'm looking at the GUAC repositories. I think we also have like similar testing things also. I don't know Oh, I don't know whether like I don't think it's the end of the world if we inherit everything and then we do a cleanup also.
Okay.
Because then it forces us to clean up our stuff as well.
Yeah. The other thing is the domains. I think justification.io.dev and I think .rocks. That those three we have. We would also like a move. We need to move the governments of that to the. We don't have that much use for it. Like one is, was early days blog, which wasn't maintained for a while. We have a sandbox at one thing, but from all what we talked about, I mean, we don't plan to do anything like that beyond GUAC, right? So I think that would all should be live somewhere under the GUAC.sh or whatever we do. I think only one thing that a couple of guys bring up is that if we move this until we figure things out, how those, for example, domains, because they're using in a lot of, I don't know, GitHub Actions and things like that, just to make sure that we don't have a period where we are blocked to do things, right? To move forward in this transition period, right? So that are the open questions. Like if yeah. Some people are like suggesting that maybe we just rename everything again and donate parts of it. I'm against that because I think it's already too much confusion, classification and Trustify and everything. But yeah, if we can donate everything as is, make sure we can work in this transition period properly, and then over time, to figure out the big picture. I think that would, in my mind, that sounds okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So is you're saying the idea is that Trustify will be an OpenSSF trademark and Trustification would be a Red Hat trademark? Is that
No,
plan?
no. I think yeah.
Or both OpenSSF?
Both, yeah. We would need to. I mean, we don't have any, as far as I understand, registered trademarks, but that's something like called word mark or something like that. That Red Hat is using it, and then we need to make sure that
that's fine.
Because
is this not like an opportunity for Red Hat to decide what they do want to keep? Like, isn't there a name for like a product or how it would be called if it was part of a product?
So yeah, so basically, there's a thing. So this is all upstream and community stuff, right? It worked. So the only confusion in Trustification was the first effort that we done, and then the complete rewrite. We needed a new name, and then it's called Trustify. But it's all open source. So and Red Hat products are not using any of these. So Red Hat product is called Trusted Profile Analyzer. So it's
okay.
It doesn't affect this. So I think like there's no any value of keeping anything from our side for us. I was just concerned about like not dumping too much things on the on the GUAC, right? But we can, as you said, like if that's okay, maybe we do not do a cleanup process later on, right?
Yeah, I think my preference would be just, given the choice, like let's just dump everything in and we'll go through and sort it out instead of, delaying for however long it takes to try and, get everything neatly stacked before we move it. In no small part because you and I are giving a talk at the end of August about this. So it'd be nice to have it at least, done-ish before then.
Cool.
Okay. There was one point that you brought up about the domain, right? I think I'm not super concerned about like the domain ownership. because I think even for us, I think Mike owns the GUAC.sh domain, so
Yeah.
that hasn't been a concern from OpenSSF.
Great. I mean, I agree that that's the easiest, short-term, easiest things to do, right? I think the complication is that like we are trying to like not donate the project to the foundation, but we want to merge these communities, and yeah, there's a prehistory of a lot of stuff, so it's a little bit more complicated than the usual donation process, right? But I hope we are finally getting all sorted, right?
Okay. So I think the decision that we got to is keep it simple. You just dump all the repos in. We'll do a cleanup at some point. Okay.
Great. So yeah, I'll communicate that back. See if any thoughts, and hopefully we'll get back in touch with Naomi and finish the agreement.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
I added one or two things. I think this is just a FYI. I think most may already have seen this, but we enabled the Kusari inspector to try it out. So if you start seeing notifications of that, don't be surprised. Obviously, feedback to whether what do you think of it as well. The other thing I think I noticed, and also I think Mihai was talking about it, where there's a bunch of CI failures happening that may be related to the Golang version. It looks like they are still happening. Yeah, so I think wanted to maybe like, since we have some time together, do we have any overall findings about some of the CI failures? Do we have clues for that? Or this just needs more eyes on it?
Oh, the deps.dev test changed. Looks like the value they're returning changed. Okay, that's why it's that's why that one's failing.
Okay, I see the OCI one has a failure, so
Yeah,
so
the integration test looks like it's failing because the output from deps.dev has changed in some way,
gotcha.
which is
so
strange that it's not happening everywhere. Go ahead, sorry.
it's the end-to-end test that is very flaky, and in general needs to do another rebuild. I'm unsure if it's because we started the test before the database set is fully populated, or the log is too long and GitHub just kills it because it's too verbose. It's also very hard to debug. There is one PR for nuts, 2708, that we need to update nuts everywhere in order to fix that PR. And then more recent than that, I haven't checked.
Yeah, there seems to be.
I personally think we should kill the end-to-end test for the time being.
Yeah,
Until it's like
we
until it's
could mark
cleaned
it
up.
optional.
Yeah.
So the issues that I'm seeing is interesting. Some of them for end-to-end tests, some of them are actually for unit tests also. So I wonder whether it's just like.
So the unit test right now, I think it's the deps.dev change for the recent transit test. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a separate issue. The end-to-end test is a separate issue. It sounds like end-to-end test has been flaky for a while.
I think it got too massive, too uncontrollable. I think it's doing a lot, the end-to-end test. I think it's checking for too much and
Gotcha. I see. So should we change the end-to-end test to a manual workflow and then take it out of the CI for now? Or do you want to keep it in the CI but not block on it?
You just keep it in, but don't block.
Yeah, we can make it optional.
Okay. Okay, make end-to-end test optional.
Done.
Okay, I'll look at that.
It's done.
Oh, it's done. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then the unit tests for the depths.dev.
can try fixing it.
Sorry.
I'll try fixing it.
Okay.
Dev.
Well, it sounds like it is like it shouldn't have changed, right?
It's really an integration test, right? It's calling deps.dev and doing something based on the results. So
Yeah.
if deps.dev is something that we
Well, I
think is
guess
going to change, which I think it is, then maybe we shouldn't
Yeah.
have that test, right?
Yeah, it's not mocked. It's just calling it directly.
Yeah.
That's the issue
gotcha.
there.
So, I mean, I think like for you, look at the testing pyramid or whatever. We should have a bunch of unit tests that don't actually call deps.dev, maybe some integration tests that call it, or if we do fix end to end, like, and if end to end included dev, that might be like just one place where we kind of keep these things that can change, but we do actually want to make sure don't break, like the calls out to external services. So there might be a consideration for removing some of these integration tests that are part of that are Go tests for like just relying on the intent test for external testing. If we get the external test stable. So the end-to-end test.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to have an integration test that calls GitHub to like an object that we don't change, which I think we have in a few places, right? But yeah, calling the service that's like by nature going to mutate.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make
It's interesting because I'm looking at it and it's like, yeah, I think I agree with that. Where like if it has to be unit test, it probably should be mocking. I do see the OCI test timing out and it's like pausing. So I wonder I don't know whether that's related to the failure of the depth test, but
I doubt it. I don't think so.
do we have the end to end? Okay, so we will I think, should we set that as the integration test, right? We should move it into integration test. So no unit test for dev, and then integration test for depth. Make it integration, add the integration label on it.
Yeah.
Is that the proposal?
Yeah, I mean, if it's reaching out, then it should be an integration test. But I'm saying maybe we shouldn't even have an integration test for deps.dev if it's not something that we can control to expect like a result that doesn't change. Like maybe we should rely on the end-to-end test as like one place that kind of pulls in these things that change. Integration tests again, like if we had like we have a few for GitHub, where we know that there's like an artifact attached to a release, and that release doesn't change, that artifact doesn't change, hopefully. GitHub can go down, sure, right? But like that should be an integration test where, there's more flakiness because it's not a unit test, it's talking to GitHub, but it's something that really shouldn't change out from under us.
I think my worry is that because we're kind of self-deprecating the end-to-end test, like we're not gonna have a signal.
Right. No, I'm not saying we should do it today. Like if,
Yeah.
ideally we have an end-to-end test that runs and, but like, I don't know if there's an endpoint on deps dev that isn't potentially going to change because these dependency resolutions are always fluid.
Yeah, I wonder whether we can just point it to an old version
Mm-hmm.
for dev and then use it as an integration test. Because I don't think they redo it for older versions.
Hmm.
What do you mean old version? Can you control the version of dev.dev?
No. As in like, let's say you query a package, you query the specific version of the package.
That's what we do.
And that's changing. That shouldn't
Yeah.
change. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
We are giving a specific version. We're not doing. I mean,
But maybe
I think
this is dev is broken.
I think it's yeah. So we're passing it in a specific version, like version 1.0.0 in this case, the one that's breaking. So it should be an old version, I think. I don't know if it's a new, unless they're like overwriting it. I don't know.
I don't think they are. Let's make okay. This is make just now. It's a go.
Because we are like I'm just looking at it quickly here. Most of them are tied to a specific version. We're not querying straight package name or something like that, for example.
Are they all Go packages?
No, they're not all. Some are cargo and npm,
So-
but they all specify
Yes.
versions. So
But that package has a version range of a dependencies. So if a new package is released in its dependencies, that is a newer version, and it's a language that dependency resolution picks the newest version, then it's going to change, right? Like Go specifically picks the oldest version out of a
yeah, so I think this is the issue where the package is actually not found. So
But
actually,
it exists. Like I think
Yeah.
that I think depth of depth is wait. I think it's just broken.
it might just be sometimes it like loses data and then it comes back the next day. That's on dev.dev. Like it errors out sometimes and it's like, oh, actually I was wrong. It's here actually. So
This is interesting. I feel like this is a bug.
maybe if you can talk to the
Yeah,
you can-
I'll ask them.
yeah, exactly. If you can message the guys, be like, hey, what's going on here? So I don't think it's a bug on our side. It's just that I agree the data could change though. I think that is an issue in devs.dev, or our test at least too. But yeah, I was looking at that real quick. Yeah, the whole package disappeared. So this
Yeah. All right. I'll follow up on that. This seems weird. So yeah, I agree that I don't think this is. I mean, we can structure it a little bit better, but the test feelings on us. Let's see. The OCI, let's get this resolved and then see whether the OCI one is still firing.
delete it. Like, what do you want me to do for now? Or should we wait till the dev.dev?
Let me just reach out to dev and see what they say.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk in Slack and then we can figure it out. Okay.
Okay. Cool. 5 minutes out. Anything else that we want to chat about?